CoinTraders, what is going on? Big day for XRP in the market here. So we did have a judge make an initial ruling on the SEC lawsuit case, which has been going on since December of 2020 for over 2.5 years here. Now, we haven't had a finalized section of this lawsuit yet, but we do have an initial ruling, and the judge did rule that it's not necessarily security on its face, which has led to a nice big altcoin pump today, and XRP, which now is currently up on the day about 65%. At the high point, it was up 100%. So, like we said, not a final and complete ruling. So this lawsuit's definitely not over just yet, but we do have a lot of great things in shaping up for XRP to be the victor in this type of case, especially when we talk about securities for crypto, which is another one of the reasons why a lot of the other altcoins today are just pumping across the board like we see. Now let's go ahead and talk about price and what's next for XRP after this type of big move based on a lot of the technicals. So right now, starting off on the weekly chart right now, so the big pump, we've seen a lot of times similar to what XRP typically does in these type of moves. So it will be steady trading more or less flat and then huge pumps, and then pretty big retracements too on every single time after we do find a lot of these big type of pumps. And so especially right now, we're not necessarily looking at that much volume. Granted, we have had a lot of reduced trading volume ever since a lot of exchanges delisted it from the lawsuit itself. But right now on the weekly, currently looking at 83.134 million XRP. But like we said, that's not necessarily that much overall. So if we can see continued week over week, then we could see a little bit more pump action from XRP. But like we said, typically we do see these type of giant, massive spikes, typically that do lead to weeks of retracement afterward that do culminate once this initial pump has finished. So there's not necessarily a reason to think anything's different in this instance, despite we have broken some very nice technical levels, which we will talk about here in a second. Now, XRP's actually been performing really strong against the rest of the crypto space, because if we actually talk about, regardless of all of the things that happen here, so you can see we had an initial run up in November of 2020. And then once the lawsuit hit, we had a pretty big pullback, but ultimately the bull market from the crypto space continued to propel XRP, and especially after finding a new trend high, didn't necessarily make a new all-time high. I think that probably we could have seen it had we not experienced a lot of the delisting of exchanges and probably the lawsuit news. But anyway, nonetheless, I digress on that anyway. So you can still see we had a very nice setup for the overall kind of market move of the 2021 bull run, and essentially not finding a new lower low compared to what we actually experienced back in the March 2020 COVID lows. So from there, we were looking at XRP being at a low of 11.65 in that sense. Now, when we actually found our most recent low coming off of the bear market, which did occur on the week of 13 June, we were looking at a low in that instance of 28.748 cents. And that was our low. So after finding that, we actually continued to make higher lows, stepping up in this process. And that's why, especially now, after blowing through a very big key resistance line, pretty much right around the 55 to 60 cent level, that's going to be a very nice close on the current week to see happen here. And that's why this move is a lot stronger, in fact, indeed. So typically, if we do look back, for instance, we can see even coming off of the the March COVID lows in 2020, that is where we found sort of similar patterns where not necessarily that much was happening, more or less sideways accumulation for the overall price. And then especially once we found a very nice breakout happen for this type of pattern. And so if we go ahead and zoom in on the weekly chart as well, just want to go ahead and talk about this equilibrium that we did have that just completely smashed on the current weekly candle. And with 3 days and 5 hours left on the current weekly candle, it is very reasonable to think that we're going to see a very nice close on top of both the 60 cent resistance as well as the 55 closing level of resistance. Actually, it does drop down to about 53.5. So a very big zone that was extremely strong resistance ever since seeing the bears take control of this zone. So if we do zoom out, you can see very nice point of resistance. Resistance took control of it, held it as support, and then held it as support. Bears flipped this level. So closing above this level, and let's go ahead and actually clean up this chart because it's looking kind of dirty here. Having a strong break back above this big zone, since we haven't seen prices above it since April of 2022. So for about not quite a year and a half yet, but almost coming up on a year and a half, we haven't seen prices on top of this level. And keep in mind too that this is also in the face of the SEC lawsuit not even being completely finalized. This is just a little bit of bullish optimism here coming in when the judge says that he doesn't see it as an SEC security directly on its face. So that's why we have been seeing a lot of optimism and hope coming in based on a lot of that type of news. So we are expecting a little bit more of that positive expected result for the SEC lawsuit anyway. But like we said, we have been dealing with this lawsuit for over 2.5 years and nothing's finalized just yet, surprisingly. But I have always voiced my opinion that I think the longer it does take to actually have a trial or settle, that the more in favor I do think that the result will come in favor of XRP and Ripple. Now, so next good thing I want to talk about here on this weekly chart is pretty much just the continuation after holding a very nice supportive level on top of these exponential moving averages. So for the last month, you can see we were holding on top of the 26-period exponential moving average. The recent weekly candle did close below that, but we were still holding up on the 26th. And now we are starting to see a very nice formation, especially with the current weekly candle, where we're starting to get this very nice cross. 12-period weekly is on top, and right now the 50 and the 26 are touching more or less. But actually, in terms of price levels, we are seeing the 26 on top technically at 48519, and the EMA 50 is at 48122. Again, not only that, but we are seeing the break of two previous trend highs, which was this consolidation point as well. We are also seeing, like we mentioned, a stair-stepping pattern of this base of support. So continuous higher lows on this weekly chart does show a lot of buying and the supports raising. So now to have a very nice confirmation breakout is going to be one of the strong signals, especially once this weekly candle prints in about just over 3 days. So now I do want to flip over into the daily chart and talk about price action on the daily since we have been on the weekly this whole time. So we're seeing now the most amount of bullish volume that we've actually seen come in since April of 2021. So the most amount of bull volume that we've seen now in the current candle that we have seen in over 2 years. Now we know that a lot of this is just that news-driven catalyst type of event. And so in situations like this, it really comes down to some of the shorter time frame charts in order to actually establish what the current trend is going to be. Because as we know, the higher we do see prices get on this candle, the higher that the risk does go up for entries because of the slippage risk to the downside. But what necessarily creates that risk is losing the shorter term trend. So for example, if we flip over into the 15-minute chart and we turn on volume again, you can see that we're actually looking at quite a significant amount of sustained volume. So what really is going to flip this chart and create a little bit more of that downside risk and pressure is being able to lose the uptrend on this chart, which typically is going to come from losing a lot of this big bullish volume momentum. Now, since we have seen the biggest, most amount of volume that we have seen so far, it's going to be tough to think what's actually going to be able to sustain it. So if we can see the hype from this type of event sustain for a couple of days, then that's typically where we would look to ultimately start to see our retracement and pullback, or at least a cool down and consolidation, likely forming a bull flag in that instance. So again, volume on the shorter term is really going to be our key, and we can't let one candle necessarily dictate what's going to ultimately happen, because we could see a cool down and then the secondary spike coming in for this XRP volume. So right now in the shorter term, flipping over into the 5-minute, we're actually looking like we're starting to form a little bit more of a consolidation pattern. And so I think this top right now coming in at 95 cents is going to be in more or less. And then we are going to start to slip a little bit, especially as we can start to see a taper off of volume. Not necessarily anything to indicate that we are going to start to see a break and a change in the shorter term trend to the downside. And so right now we are still expecting a little bit more consolidation, holding some of these exponential moving averages, and then probably seeing another pump to the upside. But if we do start to lose some of those supports and start to see the exponential moving averages change, then that is going to be one of the things that we look to. So we were just on the 5-minute. So if we do lose that, then we are going to look to the 15-minute, say, hey, okay, where are these exponential moving averages going to be? So those are going to be our downside targets to actually look at. And then we talk about a little bit more long-term consolidation coming in, especially after seeing such huge extensive movement to the upside without any real opportunity for a cool down and some of that consolidation to take place underway. So for example, let's go ahead and flip over to the 1-hour chart and turn on the RSI Relative Strength Index, which is the top one right here that we're looking at. You can see all this green highlighted in the upper section, and we are looking at a current RSI right now of 98.84. So even just recently on the previous candle, looking at 98.83. So essentially, we're almost smashed up against the 100 line. So we do know that on the shorter term, in the 1 hour at least, we're due for a little bit more of that pullback and some of that consolidation, which can help normalize. But just because the RSI is at 98.8 doesn't mean that it can't actually go up and reach that 100. But like we've said, it's all about managing risk right now, and risk is still high for a little bit more of that potential coolback. So no necessarily reason to FOMO in right now at this point. Let's be patient, wait to see what develops out of this chart, and then you can base that on whether or not you do want to make a new entry for XRP. So like we said, definitely going to be keeping our eye on the shorter time frame charts right now, and until anything on this changes, it's just normal business, and we do expect a little bit of the consolidation at some point, since that hasn't really come in, kind of like a longer version of what we saw in this instance, kicking off the 12-period EMA once again. But like we said, in an otherwise bearish market, we do have to realize that one piece of bullish catalyst news isn't necessarily enough to create long-term sustained buying and otherwise change the market. But we also know that with this type of move, these are some of the indications that we see which typically do start to create that reversal and start to lead to trend changes, for the longer term. So with that said, that's actually going to go ahead and wrap up the show today and our update on XRP and the SEC lawsuit. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe button if you have not done so just yet. Also, drop me a comment down in the section below. Do love getting back to each and every one of you. Do appreciate all the continued love and support. As always, means so much. Stay safe, take care, everyone, and I'll catch you back in the next video.